Welcome to Snippets of Wisdom with your host, Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Snippets of Wisdom is the boomer's gift to the next generation and to the world at large. Dr. Michael J. Murphy and Coach Mike Carell are experienced psychotherapists, writers, and healers who find the greatest satisfaction in sharing the benefits of a lifetime of struggle and learning. Coach Mike has spent decades spreading deep wisdom and supporting youth through the juvenile justice system. Dr. Michael has directed mental health services at many correctional centers and testified in countless trials as an expert in sex-related issues and mental illness. And he was one of the 500,000 humans at Woodstock. So now, please welcome the hosts of Snippets of Wisdom.
And welcome to Snippets of Wisdom. I'm Coach Mike Carell. With me is Dr. Michael Murphy, a forensic psychologist. Today we have an interesting topic for all of you. Dr. Murphy and I are what are called baby boomers. We are the people who were born between 1946 and 1964. And it's an interesting topic because when you look at it from different perspectives, you find that there is a wealth of knowledge, of wisdom. There is even literal financial wealth among baby boomers that kind of may, I don't know, I think it manages quite a bit. We tend to have most of the real estate. We have considerable savings among us. And, you know, there's some controversy about whether or not we're worth waiting for. You know, it'd be interesting to find out how the younger generations feel about us. Are we in the way? Are they done with us? Or are they looking for anything that we have to offer today? Dr. Murphy was one of those who was at the Woodstock Festival in, what year was that, 69?
1969, it was.
1969. And, you know, Woodstock has historical significance. Because of what it represented, you know, baby boomers were the hippie generation, the peace and love generation. Back then, it was all about sex, love, and rock and roll, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, free love, and all of those things. But the attitude towards all of those things has changed just a little bit, but the passion is still very, very strong among us and among the other generations as well. But what was it like, Dr. Murphy, going to Woodstock and participating in all that? What was going through your mind and your heart at that time?
Let me describe it a bit. You know, I think it's great to go back. It was 1969. I was, I think, 16 years old, maybe 16 and a half, almost 17. And one of my siblings rolled up to the porch. I was sitting on the porch in a working class neighborhood in the working class town that I grew up in. And someone rolled down the window and said, "Hey, Michael, want to go to a concert?" So I had no idea what was going on. I jumped in the car, which of course was a Volkswagen Bug. And next thing I know, we were on the road. And, you know, 3 hours later, we arrived in the area of Woodstock, New York. And we parked, the traffic and the numbers were so surprising and overwhelming to law enforcement that people were just parking their cars on the side of the road and walking the last half mile or quarter mile into the area where everyone was. And that's what we did. So I walked with my siblings and friends, and we walked to the area, and it was just this massive, massive group of people, obviously, that were there. Somewhat of a surprise. Things were just starting. Of course, there was rain. I mean, everything was muddy and kind of messy. And the fundamental message that we'll talk about, I think the message of Woodstock was that spontaneous things can happen and they can be magical and everyone can just get along and do just fine. And that's sort of the positive ethic of the Woodstock nation, I think, is that good things can happen. You just get together, you throw the pieces up in the air, and maybe they come together in kind
Yeah.
of a perfect way, so everybody has a good time. And so, really that was the message of it all. Love and cooperation,
Yeah.
music, bad food, and
That's
peace.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I think if anybody wanted to really get a handle on what the history was like, I mean, you can get it from books and things like that. But if you opened up the lyrics to the songs, especially the songs that were at Woodstock, like Richie Havens' Freedom,
Yep.
and, you know, uh, Give Peace a Chance, all these songs, listen to the lyrics and it'll tell you where our head was at, where our heart was at, what were our concerns, you know. And as I remember it, there was a war going on that many people protested because it didn't seem like an ethical war. Um, the Our parents, the military, the World War II veterans, even World War One veterans, um, didn't really know how to justify the war this time. But as loyal veterans, they stood by our country's decision. And I remember I I wanted to go to Canada because I wanted to be a conscientious objector, right? And I told that to my dad, and he thought that was not right. Your country has done so much for you. How in the world are you going to turn your back on your country now and flee to another country? And I said, I just don't believe that it's ethical. I think it's a war about money. It's not about peace. It's not about like the Second World War. It wasn't the same. But he got so angry with me that the only time he ever struck me, boom, he says, "How dare you turn your back on your country?" And I really thought about it, and when you have that kind of loyalty, that kind of driving loyalty to your country, that is significant. You know, as a kid, I didn't think about it to that depth, but what do you think about that?
So the difference in the generations, of course, was extreme. And I think one of the overwhelming forms of understanding of the 500,000 and more people who were present at Woodstock is that they were not in favor of the Vietnam War because they
Right.
just weren't in favor of war for any reason. So it seemed like we were a generation that was coming up with these alternative ideas. Maybe we don't have to engage in sort of, these seemingly senseless conflicts with other human beings for
Yeah.
any reason. And so, as Cassius Clay said when Muhammad Ali, when he chose to resist the draft himself, he
Yeah.
said that he didn't have any problem with the people of Vietnam. So why would he go over there and seek to harm them? So he resisted the draft himself, and he had some significant personal sacrifices as a result of that, if you recall. So I
Hmm.
think the people there at Woodstock and the sort of the Woodstock ethic was that we can do something differently in this life. We
Right.
don't necessarily have to sacrifice our lives working and doing things that we don't enjoy just to survive,
Hmm.
or just because some authority figure tells us that that's what we should do, like go over to another country and fight them and go to battle with them. So that all
Yeah.
seemed pretty absurd for the Woodstock nation, of which we
Yeah.
were a part.
Yeah.
So I think really understanding that a good and peaceful and loving life was possible is the idea that infused Woodstock and made it such a pleasant time, even though it was raining most of the time. It was
Right.
kind of cold. There was not much. You're just wandering around in the mud and the slush, but everybody was pretty happy, with the music and with the fun and the peace, and the good feeling that was there. And the good
Yeah.
feeling was that, hey, maybe we can make this world a better place, a
Right.
more peaceful and loving place.
Right.
That's the Woodstock idea, and that started to germinate from there, from Woodstock out to the larger world with what we call the hippie movement.
Hmm.
Um, with people starting to think about other ways of living and other ways of surviving that would avoid some of the pitfalls that humanity has fallen into in the past.
For sure. for sure. You know, one of the things that occurs to me is that when you saw the power that the sheer numbers had, all of these people with the same mindset doing something together, there wasn't a whole lot that many people could do. You know, even law enforcement kind of reassessed and did things a little bit differently than they would have because of the sheer numbers. And I think knowing that and knowing the power that there is in numbers may have spurred the communalism concept. Because shortly after that, I joined a commune and I lived in communes for 7 years. And I started several communes, you know, in during those seven years in different parts of the world. And so you know, it wasn't until after that that a launch against communalism, living in communes, became the thing. So I after that is when you had people doing crazy communes like the Kool-Aid guy. What was his name?
Yeah, the electric Kool-Aid acid test.
Yeah,
Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey was his name. And he's
yes.
the one who was made famous, the electric Kool-Aid acid test,
And
which
then
Thomas Wolfe wrote the book about. Right.
right.
Wonderful book, the electric Kool-Aid acid test.
And then there were the other ones, the religious ones, um, where they gave people something to drink, and it became the meme. You know, I didn't drink the Kool-Aid
Right.
meme that people were talking about. In other words, I didn't buy in. You know, so I don't know. I think I still savor the fellowship. I still favor the common cause. I mean, what better cause can you have than peace and love?
Right.
You know, and expressing your love for each other
Yeah.
openly. Uh, it became, I don't know, offensive to some people. Maybe the way we did it. It kind of reminds me of how people took to Elvis Presley when he first came on. It was vulgar. It was like, oh, you don't do that, you know, you don't move that way on stage, and you don't use those kinds of lyrics, and you know, until people finally got used to it.
Yeah. So you remember that song? I'm not sure about exactly the lyrics, but what's the problem with peace, love, and understanding? Like
Right.
people are having such a problem with peace, love, and understanding. Why don't we just adopt that and live that way? And that was the Woodstock ethic that we sought to put out there, and that motivated the movement toward communes. I lived with people as you did, and many of us did, all of us did really, as we
Mhm.
sought to survive. Um, being young people and then growing older and realizing, well, what am I going to do with my life? I mean, how am I going to live? How am I going to get the resources to buy food, clothing, and shelter? So those are the challenges that we faced, and we wanted to sort of meet those challenges in a different way than our parents did,
Yeah.
and or than was the dominant ethic in society at that time. And
Yeah.
now here we are. We find ourselves, decades later at a very different point in our lives, and we're going to be talking about that as this show goes on. But
Yeah.
really starting with the foundation, we really sought to interpret life in a new way, and
Yes.
to first and foremost put forward the ethic that it is possible to make a choice about how to live
Yeah.
in ways that are consistent with your values.
I
And they
think
may
that
not be
was
the same as those of others. Right.
right. Right. You know, and I think that was the onset for environmentalism, which we can talk about when we come back because we got a break coming up. So stay with us. We got tons to talk.
Mike Zorich, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorick, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorick has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
And welcome back. We're talking about the onset of environmentalism and the different ways that we used to do what we could to preserve, what we had and to not waste as much. I remember in the early 70s, we, as a group, we used to procure food that was not sellable because the packages were damaged, and we'd go to different merchants and different people, and they would donate food. We operated food banks. We created food banks with that extra food. And we'd take the food to the parks and give it away to people and sing them songs about salvation and redemption and things like that. Redemption songs like the Bob Marley song. But anyway, and it took off. People began to see what we were doing and following in like fashion to save what we have, preserve what we have, and respect the earth, respect what we have, and not be so wasteful. But you were talking about, you mentioned Gaia.
Right.
And what was that? Tell us what that was all about.
Yeah. So that attitude, the Woodstock attitude, which was one of essentially a communal life, the communal ethic of sharing and realizing that we are all together. So the fundamental largest example of that is the concept of Gaia. And that is that the planet Earth itself is a living being. And all of it is really one. It's an interactive, dynamic, living entity, the Earth itself, of which we are a part. We are an organic, vital element within the overall living orb of this globe that we call Gaia, that is the natural whole system of the Earth. And so once we understood that, geez, this whole planet is really one big dynamic system, and we need to figure out how we can interact with that system in a way that is actually caring, even loving and supportive and nurturing of the well-being of that system, the system of Gaia, the world itself. And now, as we are senior citizens, most of us, and the majority of boomers now are reaching retirement age. Hundreds of thousands are retiring every year. So we're leaving the workforce and starting to really look back on our lives and make decisions about how we want to spend the remainder of our lives. These crucial decisions are really part of this ethic to figure out how we can, what do we have to give now? Like, what more do we have to give to the world, to our communities, to our families, to our offspring, and to the earth itself, now that we are reaching an older age? So I think, that ethic, the Woodstock ethic, is still percolating forward now.
For sure.
As we make these decisions. And one of the things we'll be talking about as we go forward with this presentation is how we are going to deal with the end.
Yep.
But first, we want to deal with what we have to offer to the community now. And we talked some about mentoring, the boomers as
Yep.
being at a stage of life where we can mentor others. And we
Yes.
really need to share the wisdom that we've gathered
Yes. I agree.
over the course of a lifetime, the hard decisions that we've made
For
as to
sure.
how we're going to survive, have families, care for our children. And now, no, we really do want to have some kind of closing message about giving more to the world.
Yeah. I think most importantly, it's about how we interact with the younger generations as opposed to not how much we give. Our true legacy uh, is not necessarily in material or in the generation of wealth or anything like that, but how are we going to interact with the rest of the world in our last days? As I become an older father and a grandfather, uh, I savor the interaction with my family and with my friends. And more important than what I've accumulated or what I have learned, it's the interaction. And I found the best way to interact is to volunteer to learn from the younger. Allow my grandchildren to teach me something that only they know. Allow my children to teach me things that their generation knows that I don't know. And by doing that, it opens them up to learn what I have learned over the years. Learn the things that I paid a high price to learn. So we have that interaction, we have that give and take of learning and teaching that I think is very, very important for the quality of life that we have as we move out. And by the way, folks, if you are engaged in what we're talking about, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel because there's a lot more than we can cover in a 1 hour podcast. And we're leaving it all behind. There's other past episodes that you can check out. So like and subscribe. So what do you think about that, Dr. Murphy? That give
Yeah,
and take.
so the boomer generation now are looking over our lives. Eric Erickson, the great psychologist, had a thing about the stages of life, and he really, as we go through life, each life is kind of its own stage, and we're at the stage now where we start to contemplate and look back over our life and think about how meaningful it was in terms of our purpose. And we're going to talk more about purpose as we go through this discussion. But all of us did something with our lives with the 40 or 50 years that we had after we grew up and then began to do something. What I did was work largely in jails and prisons, psychiatric hospitals, do assessments of people who were mentally ill and make recommendations as to how they might be treated or cared for. So a long career of caring for others and trying to contribute something to the well-being of the community in that particular setting, the criminal justice system
Yep.
and the community care system. So each of us did something. Some of us were school teachers, some of us were carpenters, some of us were home builders, some of us were medical doctors. I mean, everybody did something to contribute to the community. And now we're looking back over that life and trying to figure out how we can offer, as you were saying earlier, wisdom to the coming generations in terms of how they might be most useful in caring for each other and caring for this planet. And
Yeah.
so I think it's just really a huge wave that's emerging now as the aging baby boomers start to reflect and think over their lives and think uh, both backward and forward with regard to how we want to be remembered and what we would like to contribute to the world during this next uh, period of our lives, which may be 5 years, it may be 5 minutes, it may be 25 years. We don't know what it's going to be, but we want to make it meaningful.
Right. You know, a Buddhist saying was, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And I remember the existential movement, um, the Be Here Now movement, was all about focusing on what are you doing right now? What is the quality of your life right now? What decisions are you making right now that'll give you the best quality of life that you can have? And I think when we focus on what we're able to do right now at this very moment, it changes our whole perspective. It reduces the amount of worry that you have about what if I'm not good enough? What if I don't learn enough? What if I don't have everything I need to build the future that I want? Or, if my past was only better, type of thing. Why worry about things you don't have control of when we do have control of right now? We do have control of our decisions right now. You know, I think the philosophy behind that is hard to teach, except by example. You know,
Right. One of the things that I did is that I majored in philosophy in college,
yeah,
just because I thought that was a fun thing to do. To be
right.
curious about what is the nature of the world, what's the nature of life, what's the nature of existence, all these questions that philosophical people have asked for many, many, many hundreds of years and come up with a whole variety of answers.
For
So
sure.
the process of just being able to be curious and learn more is an ethic that I think is starting to reemerge now. And maybe that's something that we can nurture with this stage of our lives. That is, we boomers. We can really start to nurture the coming generations' efforts to just seek a greater and deeper understanding. It's interesting because a lot of the people in the West of our generation now have focused a lot on medical care, like medical science. There's a lot of controversy about it now. We're a we're a nation that has the most expensive healthcare system
Yeah.
that has ever existed, and yet our health is really among the poorest
Awesome.
in the world. And so we're starting to question that and look at other forms of self-care that maybe come from the East, that come from India, that come from China,
Yeah.
come from other parts of the world who have a deeper and more complex and perhaps more subtle understanding of how we should be caring for ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think, it's really something now that we can nurture and really contribute to the world is that alternative understanding about what it means to be alive and
And
how
to
we
be,
can nurture and foster our lives more vitally uh, through self-care in ways that seem to be more effective than the sort of classical Western modes of medical care.
I was relieved, and actually my faith in the system uh, perked up when I met my doctor. He's a DO, um, osteopathic doctor, which means that he combines the natural remedies with Western knowledge, and it makes for a good blend of healthcare and wellness. But years ago, I was strictly opposed to Western medicine, allopathic medicine, and my doctor, who was also a DO at the time, an osteopath, um, was on vacation. And filling in for him was a doctor from India. And she asked me if I was on the medication that was prescribed. And I said, actually, no. And she said, well, what are you doing? Because all of your vitals are improved. Your blood pressure is down and everything is, your cholesterol is lower and everything. I said, you know what I did, doctor? I started doing breathing exercises and I meditated now. And I started eating different food. And she goes, I wish more patients would do what you're doing. She says, in my country, we use Ayurvedic medicine, which is medicine that goes to the root cause of illness. And she says, unfortunately, nowadays people are looking for a quick fix and they want to treat symptoms instead of the root cause. I said, I get it. I totally understand. And for me, that was like the beginning of, okay, now there's some understanding. Now there's some integration of Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy as it relates to health. And, today I am more satisfied with the way the system is going because we do have the choice. Ultimately, it's our choice. Allopathic, naturopathic. What about a blend? It's totally up to us when you think about it.
And we'll be back in a moment to talk about that more deeply, because that's a very important area.
Got it.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Oh, welcome back. So we're talking about baby boomers and what we've offered, what we have to offer the world. There is wealth, wisdom, there's cultural influence that we have shared in the years, the decades that we have been alive. And I think one of the most important is how we look at our health, how we look at our life, how we view our quality of life. There's one thing to want a quick fix. There's another thing to take a holistic approach to living. But what about dying? It's inevitable. We're all going to die. And I think it's important for us to be aware of that, the quality of our life, and how we want to die, all in the same package. I remember my mom, as she was passing, she did a DNR, and she says, when it's my time to go, let it be my time to go. And as it turned out, she went to live with the grandchildren in Idaho, and they cared for her. And towards her latter years, she went into hospice at home. And it changed everything. We all felt comfortable about my mom passing because we knew how much she wanted to be with my dad, who had passed a few years earlier. Her attitude in those last years was crucial. She had the calm, reserved attitude about passing, and it was more like saying goodbye. She gave her blessing to all of us, and I happened to be trapped in Las Vegas, Nevada at the time. But it says something. The message is, the way we live today has to do with how we leave. How we move into the other side, or death, if you will. Quite a lot about Tibetan book of living and dying, the philosophy of living and dying. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and the significance of our quality of life today?
Yeah, one of the things that's wonderful about the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which is a book written by uh, one of the Rinpoche monks in the state of Tibet in the Far East, is that he talked about how important it is to think about and consider and ruminate upon the idea of the end of life before you are forced to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So we all will be forced to do so at some point. Hopefully, we have some time to think about it before it comes upon us and overwhelms us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so he's strongly saying it's very important to think about this. And so, it's something human beings, we have this drive to survive. Really
Yeah.
above all, what we want to do is keep going. And if one has been near death at some point in one's life, you really experience how powerful that drive is. Above all, we want to keep living. So it seems antithetical to even think about and consider the end of life because with every moment in all of our power, we want to survive. But there are groups now that actually are starting to consider and think about and create programs for us to even uh, begin to formalize the protocols regarding the end of life. So I have a close friend who had a loving partner for most of her life who was diagnosed with dementia. And so he had previously understood, and they had discussed at length, that should such a thing happen, he did not want to go on. There's a group called Dignitas that uh, it may be located mainly in Switzerland that actually creates protocols as to how you can go about engaging in an end of life in a more willful and dignified way. So that
Mm-hmm.
concept, for many of us, even sounds and feels absurd to
Yeah.
actually
Kind of
voluntarily.
sounds kind of morbid. Kevorkian
Yeah,
is.
it sounds morbid, and yet, if you've seen, as I have, what happens to a human being as they experience, great travail at the end of life and suffering at the end of life,
Sure.
then you can see that a voluntary choice about to end life in a more comfortable and more informed way, a more voluntary way, a
Yeah.
more conscious way, then you can really avoid a lot of suffering for family members, for other people who really
Mm-hmm.
don't want to see the misery that an individual may go through as they suffer at the end of life. So, creating protocols that allow a person to actually go through clear consent, to go through a process of making sure that they are doing this in a willful and highly informed way,
Mm-hmm.
uh, certainly is something to think about. And this friend actually went through it. Uh, he completed the process, and it was a form of great relief, both for him and
Yeah.
for his loved ones, to not have to go through the misery of the diminishing process that happens with a progressive dementia over the course of
For sure.
months
Yeah.
and possibly years of time. So, so
Yeah.
that's
Dementia could be
that's something to think about, and that the boomers, I think, are starting to consider that the formalization of protocols
Mhm.
to be able to allow the end of life. We talked about Dr. Krikorian years ago, who was sort of a forward thinker in terms of thinking about that.
Yeah.
And
And
it
it's
was too
about dying with
controversial to really
dignity.
consider at that point. Yeah,
Yeah, it's about dying with dignity and or
right.
transitioning with dignity. You know, for many of us, the concept of dying is more of a transition than anything else. And with the idea of losing your loved ones and being separated from them, um, is probably the biggest pull against moving too soon or before all hope is lost. And I think my mom had the right idea. It was kind of a micro version of what you're talking about because she just allowed. I remember towards the end, she was saying it takes a long time to die, doesn't it? Because she was
Mm.
anxious, she wanted to hurry up and go. But she didn't want to be drastic. She didn't want to suffer a lot. She didn't want us to suffer with her with the agony, of what she was going through. And it's really sad. My sister-in-law, um, as we speak, is in the hospital. She just received the last rites. Um, and to talk about the sadness when you see somebody who was at one time vibrant and engaging and kind, and she was a nurse, and tending to her today are the nurses that she trained in her youth, and they're all sad to see her leave. They're will come in, they'll hug her, they'll kiss her, they'll say we love you, and this is something that is part of humanity, is part of living a human life. And when you think about that time just before the transition, it's bittersweet. I like thinking about afterwards, and as the transition time is kind of a time of travail. The Bible talks about the travail as when a woman is going through childbirth, how difficult it is to actually give birth and the agony. But it's only fleeting. It's only going to last for a minute until you are overjoyed by the life you brought to the world. And the idea of transitioning into the next, beyond, is what I see. If we can only endure the bittersweet, however it is, whether it's going to Switzerland and doing that way, losing someone is still bittersweet. I think the focus on the positive is probably what we need to be doing. If that happens. What do you
One
think?
of the things I think to consider as we do that is what do we choose to believe occurs after death? So actually, what is death, and what is that process of transition? We speak of it as a transition from what to what. Obviously, it's from a condition of being alive and conscious to
Yeah.
being something else. So the book, The Denial of Death, was a great bestseller years ago that really talked about how much energy is devoted to just avoiding that decision, thinking about it,
Right.
and just trying not to do anything about it. But if you're conscious, and the book, like the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, uh, is a book that clearly elaborates their understanding of what happens on the other side of that curtain. When you do actually pass on, you don't just disappear. Your consciousness is not ended. Rather, it engages in a transition to another state, another form. Many different religious systems and spiritual systems have different concepts of what that state is like. So clarifying that for ourselves, engaging in some thought about what we choose to believe
Right.
happens in the process of that transition
Yeah. Yeah.
from being alive to what we choose to believe is involved in being no longer alive. So,
Right.
so it's
Right.
really a very interesting proposition to ask yourself that question: what do I believe really
Right.
happened then, and what do I think it makes sense to believe?
Yeah.
What happens then? Because that's one of the deepest questions of life,
Oh, for
is
sure.
the end of.
Yeah.
And so, what happens after the end of life? And many people, perhaps most people in the modern age, think, well, it's just it. Plato, years and years ago, he talked about that at the time of the Greeks. The philosopher Plato said, well, there's really nothing to worry about with death, because it's really one of three things. I mean, either you may uh, get together with all the great people of the ages, and you're walking around you can talk to Einstein, or talk to
Yeah.
people who have passed on, and you get to
Yeah.
meet them, or you get to just sort of, maybe you get to engage in an eternal sleep. No, but either
Hmm.
way, it's fine. So there's no need to worry about it. So we can choose to think about these things and really consider them. And we'll look forward to talking about it more when we come back
That's
in
right.
a few seconds. And thank you all for listening.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
So, welcome back. We're talking about how we live today will affect our transition. And I think it's important, and I don't know if you agree, Dr. Murphy, I think you do, that having a belief system in place that allows us to feel good about how we live today can actually help us decide how we want to transition out. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so the field of philosophy has a subcategory called epistemology. And that's
Yep.
exactly what you're mentioning is, the things that we choose to believe in true. So are true. So the field of epistemology is the decisions that we make about what we believe is real, what we believe is true, what we believe is actual. Those are the decisions that we make about. And one of the decisions that we make, as you mentioned, is what we choose to believe life is, and what we choose to believe the end of life is. And sort of that brings up the question of what we as boomers, as we near the end of our lives, want to leave for those who remain here. And that's the choices that we make about what we believe happens when we quote unquote die. And so, not to deny that, not to avoid it, not to minimize it, but just to acknowledge it and talk about it and begin to have conversations about what happens with it. I mean, start to talk to your friends about it. Start to talk to your family members about your beliefs about what happens when the end comes and what you'd like to see them believe, or how you want them to share their beliefs with you about that
Right,
whole process.
right. I think
So I
it's
think those are deep decisions and deep conversations to have that we boomers, in all of our millions and hundreds of millions, really need to share before we disappear from the face of the planet.
basically,
Yeah.
it's important. I think you're spot on with that, 100%. And I think, well, even the World Health Organization several years ago did studies on cancer patients that showed that those that had a belief in place showed a greater likelihood of recovering and being cancer free. Thereafter at significant rates. So having that belief system in place is crucial. And I noticed back when I was young, people were looking into other religions and different things. And thank God that we have a system where we are free to believe what we want to believe. We were when I was young, we were one nation under God, and that meant we were not atheists as a nation. We were not an atheist nation. And for me, having God in my life has been a lifesaver. It's and being Christian is even more, adding more to it. But that doesn't mean I don't share joy with my friends who are Muslims and Hindus and Jews and of all different religions. I even have friends who are agnostic, that we share joy together. We share hope together. And our life is dynamic. It's evolving and changing all the time. So we have that tremendous power as individuals to influence each other with our hope and with our faith. What do you think of that, Dr. Murphy?
One of the things that more and more people are identifying themselves as is spiritual but not religious,
Right?
right?
Yes.
Many
I'm
people have
one
heard
of
that phrase. I'm spiritual but not religious, and I would even say that I myself probably fall into that number, even though as a person of Irish descent who went to Catholic schools for my entire educational process, 20 something years of Catholic education, I'm very
yeah,
familiar with that form of spiritual or religious, really
yeah,
religious understanding. I identify myself now as having more of an Eastern orientation. I mean, believing in, the world consciousness, that
mhm,
the universe itself can be understood as being a conscious entity, that we are
right,
participating in something that many people now call the Earth School, that our purpose here in being alive is to live and learn and progress as conscious beings ourselves, to just arrive at, as best we can, at higher levels of understanding and awareness over the course of our lifetime, so that
yep,
we can actually bring that consciousness to bear as a part of this intelligent universe. That itself as a whole is evolving.
yeah,
I mean, Eastern forms of understanding believe that this universe is the latest manifestation of a series of universes, perhaps 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 universes that have come to fruition and grown and become more complex and
bitchin.
then fallen apart again at the end. And every one of that, the stages of birth and continuation and then the end are
Yep.
natural stages of the universe and also natural stages for each one of us as we go through our lives.
This is a special show. I hope it raised the consciousness of many other people. Be sure to like and subscribe to this channel, folks. There is a lot more to talk about when it comes to baby boomers, and so maybe we'll talk about it in other shows. But thank you for being with us today. We're going to continue talking about this, so be sure and tune in again. Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Oh,
Thank you so much. It's a great opportunity to share this conversation.
This has been Snippets of Wisdom with hosts Mike Carell and Dr. Michael J. Murphy. Tune in and learn about the primary issues facing our society today and find the best chance of securing a stable and prosperous future. Snippets of Wisdom will enrich your life and the lives of all of your loved ones.